honor to participate in this Iea platform that is collating the views and opinions of a cross-section of Ghanaian society on the issue of constitutional reforms. Indeed, this is one of a number of interventions that are being undertaken by various institutions, all with a view to ensuring that the proposed reforms see the light of day. Before I go any further, I would like to situate my presentation in the context of the introduction to the 1992 Constitution, what's called the preamble, and parts of Chapter 6, that is the directive principles of state policy. I'll come to that in a minute. But the preamble states, and I read, "We, the people of Ghana, in exercise of our natural and inalienable right to establish a framework of government which shall secure for ourselves and posterity the blessings of liberty, equality of opportunity, and prosperity, in a spirit of friendship and peace with all peoples of the world, and in solemn declaration and affirmation of our commitment to freedom, justice, probity, and accountability, the principle that all powers of government spring from the sovereign will of the people, the principle of universal adult suffrage, the rule of law, the protection and preservation of fundamental human rights and freedoms, unity and stability for our nation, do hereby adopt," and so on and so forth. And after that comes Chapter 1 of the Constitution. So this is the declaration that as a people we have together made before the first word of Chapter 1 of the Constitution is even written. I'm reading this because in all the conversations about constitutional reforms, there's a certain angle that I feel we have not explored enough. And I haven't heard the question really examined, that is that what we really need? Is it constitutional reforms that we really need at this point? Is that what will solve the problems that we face as a country? And I'll come to that in a minute. On 7 January of this year, 2023, I stated to the media as we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the promulgation of the Constitution. 30 years of constitutional democracy marks a truly watershed milestone in the history of our democracy. None of our previous democratic constitutions lasted anywhere near this long. Both the 1969 and 1979 constitutions lasted approximately 2.5 years, and the 1957 Independence Constitution only lasted a little longer than 3 years. So this is a defining moment in Ghana's political history, and we should all be quite rightly proud of how far we have come. Our achievement is truly monumental, and Ghana's reputation all over Africa as a beacon for democracy is very well deserved. We have had 8 successful democratic elections. Our elections are always keenly fought, but unlike some other countries, the outcome is never preordained. And even though they are intensely fought, the winner is always magnanimous, and the opposition always accepts the outcome or uses constitutional means to challenge the outcome. Let me also highlight that I have on previous occasions stated that our country's economic performance for the last 30 years under democratic rule is vastly superior to the 30 years of largely military rule which preceded it. This is indisputable. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, that said, it is also indisputable that we live in a time of restlessness and discontent, with a unanimous clamor for constitutional amendments that will ostensibly solve all our problems. So by all means, let us amend the Constitution if we must. However, let us also make sure that the amendments actually cure the ills we want to eradicate. we are all keenly aware that many of the problems plaguing our society will not be resolved by constitutional amendments. So I'm just going to go through a couple of questions, and this is just asking ourselves, you know, when we describe the problems we have as a society, the things that bother us on a daily basis, and I'm not talking about the big issue things, I'm talking about on a personal level, the things that bother us. I want to ask if constitutional reforms will really make a difference to those things. So for instance, what sort of constitutional reform what sorts of constitutional reforms beyond the plethora of existing laws will make us more law-abiding citizens? Which constitutional reforms will ensure that people who are already paid to deliver government services do not extort arbitrary fees before providing those services to citizens? Why do we need constitutional reforms before we sanitize our airwaves? Currently, it does not seem like there's any control or vetting of materials aired on either TV or radio. We have fed a whole generation of young people a steady diet of foreign movies, telenovelas that promote undesirable values. And we see the results today, and still we do nothing about it. Which constitutional reform can fix it? We allow charlatans to actively promote false and indeed dangerous doctrines on the airwaves unchecked. And even though people are being duped every day by these charlatans, we do nothing about it. How is this a constitutional reform matter? Which constitutional reform will help us avoid a situation where a sick person is pushed out of public transport and abandoned in a community where he or she knows no one, gets no help, and eventually dies? I'm sure we all heard that story. You heard that story? Yeah. That has become something of our character. For that to happen means that something is broken in our society, and we have to ask ourselves that constitutional reforms are all well and good, but will that solve those problems for us, the problems that we encounter as citizens on a day-to-day basis? Which constitutional reforms, indeed, will fill our hearts with true humility and make us cherish fearless honesty as prescribed in our national anthem? Truth is, we could set ourselves up for great disappointment if we proceed as if constitutional reforms will resolve all the pertinent challenges we face as a people. As we work towards undertaking these reforms, we must not lose sight of failed attempts to achieve same objectives in the past. In 2010, President John Atta Mills set up a Constitutional Review Commission that undertook a comprehensive review of the Constitution and produced a report that outlined an extensive list of proposed amendments. Ncce at the time partnered with the Constitutional Review Commission in that very extensive exercise, mobilizing town hall meetings in all communities across the length and breadth of this country so that citizens will have their say and their desires and aspirations duly captured in the final report. A white paper was produced, after which the exercise sort of just fizzled out, and in a way came to a screeching halt. We all went back to our daily grind, as it were, and nothing more was done or even heard for the next 10 years or so. A whole decade went by, nothing happened. Then in 2020, President Nana Akufo-Addo initiated the process for a limited but extremely important amendment that would have partially cured the much low concentration of power in the presidency by reducing the number of appointments that the president gets to make, because 261 MMDCs would have been elected instead of appointed as things stand. Think about it. A sitting president commenced the process that would lead to devolution of power from the presidency, that is essentially himself, to the people. And even then, we could not drive it to fruition. I want to read Article 35D of the Constitution. This comes to 35D is actually in Chapter 6, which is the Directive Principles of State Policy. It says, the state shall take appropriate measures to make democracy a reality by decentralizing the administrative and financial machinery of government to the regions and the districts, and by affording all possible opportunities to the people to participate in decision-making at every level in national life and in government. So even though in the same constitution, when you go to the articles around local government, it says that the president will appoint the heads of local government, you can see some forward thinking or some aspiration or a vision of a future where at least there will be decentralization of administration and financial machinery of government to the regions and districts. This could be interpreted as a situation where we are electing heads of local government. So the same constitution says that the president must appoint, giving conditions. But in chapter 6, which is sort of the aspirational part of the constitution, which talks about gives the guidelines for a map to our greatness, if I should put it that way. That is where you find this. So the seed is already in sown. But for 30 years, we did nothing about it. And today, it's only constitutional reforms that will resolve our problems. Bear in mind that this is one of the proposed amendments that has cross-party appeal as well as mass appeal. Almost everyone, a substantial majority of Ghanaians, agree that the elections of MMDCs is long overdue, yet somehow we could not build the needed consensus to get it done when we had the opportunity. We have to ask ourselves why these two novel attempts at constitutional reforms failed. I think the answer is a subject for another day. But please, let us not lose sight of these past events, even as we push forward with yet another attempt at constitutional reform. We must identify the challenges that led to the failures of the past so as to avoid similar pitfalls once again. Nevertheless, it should be pointed out that Ghanaians as a whole have a relatively positive view of our democracy. Afrobarometer and many other surveys consistently show that Ghanaians overwhelmingly prefer democracy to any other form of government. Hence, any step that will deepen our democracy is certainly a step in the right direction. And constitutional reforms is one such step. If it's actually going to deepen our democracy, then by all means, let's do it. But the point I'm trying to make is that let's actually do it. I think that a lot of work has been done around what needs to change in our constitution. The work started a very long time ago. I already mentioned the Constitutional Review Commission. After that, several organizations, several institutions have taken on this task, and a lot of material has been gathered. Every thinkable sort of amendment has been proposed. So we have everything there. So for me, it's really about what is the roadmap? What are the next steps? Because the information gathering, we've gathered quite a bit of it. Ladies and gentlemen, the National Commission for Civic Education is only interested in constitutional reforms to the extent that the people of Ghana are interested in constitutional reforms. Guided by our mandate, the Commission by itself does not hold a hard position on what should be amended in the Constitution. And you will find Ncce chapter 19 of our Constitution. And I'd like to read a section that talks about our functions. The functions of the Commission shall be to create and sustain within society the awareness of the principles and objectives of the Constitution as the fundamental law of the people of Ghana, to educate and encourage the public to defend the Constitution at all times against all forms of abuse and violation, to formulate for the consideration of government from time to time programs at the national, regional, and district levels aimed at realizing the objectives of this Constitution, to formulate, implement, and oversee programs intended to inculcate in the citizens of Ghana awareness of their civic responsibilities, and an appreciation of their rights appreciation of their rights, obligations as a free people, and any other function as Parliament may prescribe. So, on the issue of constitutional reforms, to the extent that it is at this stage still a debate where people want one thing or the other, the Commission takes the position that we don't have a hard position. We are not saying reform this or change that, because really it's for the people of Ghana to make those decisions and those choices. But once we get to a point where there's reforms, then our mandate kicks in to do the dissemination and education around those reforms. Our interest is in ensuring that the voices, hopes, and aspirations of ordinary Ghanaians are reflected in any reforms. Also, as the only institution explicitly mandated to propagate the content of the Constitution, we will play a key strategic role in disseminating the outcomes of any reform process. To that end, over the course of the last several months, the Ncce has been collating and distilling public opinions on aspects of the Constitution that Ghanaians want to improve. We have received opinions about the distribution of powers between the three arms of government. We have received opinions about the need to strengthen the accountability relationship between the institutions of government and the people of Ghana. And of course, we have received opinions on how our local government structures can be improved. As suggested, so the bottom line is that it is a good time to do the reforms if we are going to do it. But if we must do it, let's do it. And I will go through some of the proposals that we have collected over the last couple of months. Last year, we took it upon ourselves as a commission to do a lot of activities around these constitutional reforms. We started with our national dialogue, and we had a keynote speaker, Justice Kwama, Supreme Court Justice, and a panel that went into deep discussion about the ways in which reforms can be done and what sort of reforms we should be pushing for. After that, we held events across the country engaging security services, different types of organized groups, all to collect information, get people's views on what sort of reforms would be ideal for our country. Towards the end of the year, we had a roundtable in our office where we had 3 reviewers undertake a review of the white paper that was produced from the 2010 exercise to see if indeed the recommendations in there were still relevant to our needs today, because it's been over 10 years and a lot has changed over the period. So here are some of the suggestions that we have heard from citizens. I'll share them with you. So reforms on constitutional provisions on decentralization and local government to give more power to the structures of the district assembly. This one comes up all the time. Everywhere you go in Ghana, people really want to elect the heads of local government. And really, in this thing, on this issue, we are actually way behind. I think even Togo, they elect the heads of local government. That's not to diminish Togo in any way. All I'm saying is that it's a smaller neighbor. I think even in Nigeria, they elect the heads of local government. I don't know if I'm wrong, but I think that's the case. But they do. So we are way behind. What's really is the holdup? Everywhere you go, everybody you speak to will mention that this one, at the very minimum, we should be able to do this. A lot of people also said to bring back the date for national elections to give more time to elected presidents to form a government. Another one is that, and this one is where this is what I'm trying to make a connection with today. The need for citizens to uphold certain values, such as demand for accountability, trustworthiness, and transparency. Without these things, without changing our attitude, without starting to live by these values, some of which are contained in our national anthem and pledge, I'm sorry, but we will change the constitution and change it and change it. Maybe we'll have one written by Major Gabriel himself, and still we will not be satisfied. But a lot of it has to do with us as well. Another said that report of the Constitutional Review Commission in 2012 should be simplified and made available to the general public. I don't know how this is a constitutional reform matter, but we are collating ideas, so this is one of the ideas. So this one might sound a little self-serving, but trust me, we did not put it in there. People actually said that Ncce, which is leading the advocacy for constitutional reforms, should have accessible and dedicated platforms where the public can submit their suggestions on which articles or clauses in the Constitution should be reformed. This is very similar to what was done in 2010, and that exercise has already been done. A lot of money was spent on it. I don't know if anybody in Ghana has an appetite today to blow millions of dollars on collecting ideas as to what to change in the Constitution. Because the truth of the matter is that we know already. The introduction of non-custodian sentences and plea bargaining should be incorporated into our criminal justice system to ensure equity and fairness for minor offences. I'm sure that there's a lot of ideas on this one. Another one that sounds self-serving, please, we did not put these things in the list ourselves, so take note. And I mean, really does not belong in the Constitution, I think, but I'm still behind it. The flagship programs of the Ncce with intense national interest, such as Constitution Week, should get more publicity to attract public attention and support. So when people talk like this, I think that sometimes they don't have the language to articulate how this is a constitutional issue. But I think the idea here is that there should be more intensive public education. That's the way I see it. The 21 years eligibility criterion for a Ghanaian to be able to stand as Member of Parliament should be made to match the 18 years voting age, adult universal suffrage threshold. Because if one is regarded as old enough at 18 years to vote, then such a person should be seen as old enough to be voted for. Another issue that I find a lot of people talk about a lot is that the 4-year one-term period for a president should rather be made 8 years for one term, so that governments can finish most of their projects before the end of their term. It's also very controversial, but I've heard the argument made that because it's essentially every government is essentially aspiring for a second term, the elections for second term become very expensive, and that most governments do a good job in their first term, build up, strengthen the economy, but in their bid to secure a second term, end up overspending, and then that puts the country back in constitution. So maybe not 8 years, maybe 6 years one term, maybe 7 years one term, all up for debate.
We can bring something to the table.
When we are looking at elections, so that it's not just about the opportunity to
takes
vote out and voting, but we have to look at how much it costs us as a country.
Very informed.
Maybe some stronger regulations around campaign finance is also a sort of cure for this, rather than making it 6 years one term.
On the issue of constitutional reforms. Indeed, this is one of...
I'm from the evolutionary school, whereby as we move and progress, we do the changes, amendments here and there. So I was really confused and disturbed when Ghanaians rejected this almighty DC election. Then I knew that Ghanaians are hypocrites. They don't understand democracy and they don't want democracy. Our democracy to me is stillborn. The fact that somebody, Ncce, who is holding the power is saying, let us start from somewhere. I am giving away this authority to the people to elect. And the same Ghanaians say, we don't want it. So I really, but nevertheless, I believe that we must take the process. Evolutionary process is not throwing the whole thing away, but through parliament, through civil society, through institutions like this, article by article, here and there, we bring changes. Like you said, in Britain, they are still even writing new bills, making amendments and changes. Why not Ghana? So I think let us appreciate what we have, but we should not be complacent, but let us take it one at a time. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm a member of the CPP, Political Affairs Chairman. Madam Addy, are you scared of politicians?
No, I'm not scared of politicians.
Would you take where you are as a struggle?
A challenge that can be overcome, not a struggle.
You do not think that because politicians will not look at Ncce and organizations like that, you would need to stake, if I can use your own life, to get the right things done?
Stake my life?
Yes.
To get what?
The right things done by politicians.
I don't think that I need to go to the point of staking my life. I believe that I believe a lot of things. One of them is that there's a way in which while you wait or while you negotiate, while you push to get what you need, you do the best with what you have and you let the work speak for you. That's one of the things I do.
But you push, they don't do. You push, they don't do.
Let's go straight to the point.
Okay.
What is your...
So let me go straight to the point. Chairman, really, I do not understand why we do not use perpetual secession in this constitutional thing you're talking about. There is a document, 948 pages of CRC. Why don't we look at that document first and see how that document then would either apply or not apply to the current constitution? And why do we say we are sitting to discuss it now, and then we will see how we add that on to what we're doing? Because the document is already there. We spent millions of dollars putting that process together. And so if we were sitting here today and we're reviewing that document, some of the things you're saying might be in that document, which we can then say, right, we would apply X, we would apply Y, we would apply J. And then any new thing, because constitutions are dynamic, and because what we do, politics is dynamic, we add some to it, and then we move forward. My good friend Vladimir, he wants a complete change of constitution. Even educating the people with this constitution is wahala. So I don't think I would say we want a complete change, but we take the good things of what is in the 1992 constitution, and then we add the others to it, and we move forward because it's a dynamic document. Politics is dynamic, and we've got to get to a stage where we can put politicians in line, because you see, politicians are there to serve us, not us to serve them. So we, all sitting here, should be able to put politicians in line. And I think the first point of call would be the Constitution. And because we already have a semblance of what a review of a Constitution would be, let's start from that point and add on. Thank you.
The Ncce's mandate, we should try and understand it very well. Our mandate says we should inculcate in the Ghanaian citizen an awareness of the existence of the Constitution. and their rights and responsibilities as free people. So our mandate is centered around the Constitution, not the process of making the laws. Madam Chair has conceded that when it becomes necessary to collaborate with Parliament to educate on the processes of making the laws, we will do so. Sometimes Ghanaians perceive our mandate too broadly than I think. So where other institutions have also been given mandates, I'll, just for purposes of clarification, mention the Electoral Commission, which as part of its mandate is expected to do voter education. But our responsibility is a broader civic education, even though I would want to concede that part of the civic education, an aspect, is the voter education. But when it's time for elections and our various budgets are approved, that of voter education goes to the Electoral Commission, and they will not leave that for Ncce. But we have other broad programs that we plan for an entire year. Every election year is a normal year in our programmatic work. So we will program and do an aspect of the voter education, which an aspect equally is done by the Electoral Commission. This is just an example I'm citing. So when it comes to the work of GRA, we've collaborated with the GRA to do tax education. We collaborated with Bank of Ghana when they were rolling new currencies. So you could see that part of our mandates most of the time include collaborations with other state institutions on their mandates. But when it comes to those mandates, they actually enter into memorandum of understanding with us, and then some kind of budgetary responsibilities will have to be accepted by them so we can do that education. But I've come to realize that largely Ghanaians expect us to be a jack of all trades, where every other institution's mandate is supposed to be part of our constitutional mandate. So we just pick any topic, even if it falls under someone's mandate, and then start doing education on it, and then leaving what is core to us. And I think sometimes we try to do this, and it affects the little amount that we could have rationalized to do our core work very well. We end up overstretching our resources to do the mandate of other institutions, and then we sit back and take the criticism for it. So I think that when these kind of calls come, we should be doing them in context of our own mandates. What are we expected to do as an institution? When we put it in context, I think it will help us to know whether Ncce is doing its work or we are being overstretched to do other people's work in addition. Thank you.
So move follow for the past for some time now, no. Every Tuesday, omo masla platform me na omo de nipa bebre ba different people ba say omo beka ni omo dream say na omo dream fa ho about the Constitution. Say na mo amu nyina amu nim no for the past for at least a couple of years now no. Obia Wagana ka say yes the Constitution no. Even mo say yes the whole Constitution. Yen tonchune kra na yen new one. Even mo so say Constitution no papa, but one or two things the enko ye wo. Into yen hwehwe sa one or two things no. Na yen sesa enumo. Into no sa debate na ekoso no. Ena ehu meeting na ye no ne ye frey say Ncce yen beka ya adwen emfa say asemi hu. Some of the things na never be na ye kan ye say Constitution reform there. Yenyim say President Mills started or you set up a whole commission. Omo ye adwuma bebre. In fact, say adwuma no Ncce for come ho na dey ye. Omo call oman mu nyina every community. Na ya in the friend nipa bi so omo say e dey na mo pese yes san e dey na say yes san. Yes our discussions na ye dey nyina bom ye reports no over 900 pages so papa. Yeah, fee reports no white paper government here white paper that so say omo yi reforms ni bi am select bia eno na ye best start ye the best starting but after that no ade nyina ankosi hwe ho a na ankosi hwe
I don't know. All we know is that it didn't work. There are lots of reasons, but me to me, here, some of it has to do with change of government. So there was that. And I made a council, even in recent times. You can say 2020, you try to say one reform on local government. So reform on local government, Ubia Jitumu, both political parties Jitumu say. As I say, ma MMDCs no, elect omo. Na nipa na omo te district, omo elect omo local government chief executive. Ubia Jitumu, and the president. Yes, sir, or push it, and Masadia no, I started here, it looks like not a koye, but at some point, no, so, and a baye basa, yen to me, and yet, as some may can say, yen beside you say, reforms na ye, problems na yenya in the last 2 attempts are Mima as example, say your faces are problem with you, ma, ye bear anything. I say yet to hear time, ye again who say, a dear nedis have problem by ye. Send a bear, send a year de Sandia Cobium. You do Sahona, you bet to me solve this problem. Also, no, me say, constitutional reform. A young mom say a bear, but send a yes, you are setting him war or mind no more. Send your behavior, was send your attitude to know. Sanyaman, a constitutional reform, maybe CSC and into as Ncce, you know, yeah, position say constitution, I say yes, some way, and I yes, some way. Because your mandate to me education about the constitution, not changing of the constitution. Into no near woman say, you be part of all the discussions that also leading to a roadmap. There be changes, no, but yeah, there changes, no, but now yeah, reforms nibia. Then we take it on, say, and they say, yeah, education. I'm not funny in that here, say, sa constitution, na to say, when I ask someone, when I ask someone, I ask someone, implication, you say, ma wo abrabu. Into a no who assembly ever come.